Let's talk about a period that didn't just redraw the world map. It completely rewired our global system of power, wealth, and identity. We're diving into the Age of Imperialism. So let's just start with this. This is a real poster for a human zoo, an actual attraction from the time we're talking about. And it immediately makes you ask a pretty startling question. Could something this shocking even exist today? The mindset that made this possible, that's exactly what we're here to unpack. So to really get how an idea like a human zoo could even happen, we've got to start with the basic building blocks, the key ideas behind this new age of empire. Okay, first step, you have imperialism. At its core, this is the idea. It's the belief, the doctrine, that one country has the right to dominate another. And this was often justified by a deep-seated belief in their own superiority, whether that was cultural, racial, you name it. Basically, imperialism is the why. And then you have colonialism. Now, if imperialism is the idea, colonialism is the action. This is the part where you go out and actually do it. You establish a colony in a foreign land to exploit its resources and its people, all for the benefit of the home country, the metropolis. So let's just make sure that's crystal clear. Imperialism is the ideology of having an empire. Colonialism is the practice of building and maintaining it. One is the thought, the other is the action. Simple as that. Which, of course, brings up a huge question. Why then? What was it about the 19th century that unleashed this sudden, aggressive wave of expansion? Let's get into the drivers of domination. Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was more like a perfect storm of factors all hitting at once. Politically, nations were in a fierce competition for prestige. The more colonies you had, the more powerful you looked. Demographically, Europe's population was exploding, and people needed somewhere to go. Economically, the Industrial Revolution was incredibly thirsty for raw materials and needed new markets to sell all its stuff. And on top of it all, new tech like steamboats and the telegraph suddenly made it possible to conquer and control huge territories far from home. But how did they justify all this? I mean, really? Well, they had a powerful ideology, often called the civilizing mission. This idea framed conquest not as greedy or violent, but as a noble duty, a responsibility to civilize the rest of the planet with Western ideas and technology. Then nowhere on Earth did all these forces collide more dramatically or more tragically than in Africa. This period became known as the Scramble for Africa. You know, at the start of the 1800s, what Europeans knew about Africa was pretty much limited to the coastline. The vast interior of the continent was home to hundreds of different independent kingdoms, empires, and complex societies. The speed of the takeover that followed is just stunning. Take a look. In 1880, European control was pretty minimal. But by 1913, we're talking just 33 years later, the whole picture is flipped. Almost the entire continent had been carved up and claimed by European powers. And this wasn't random chaos, it was all calculated. At the Berlin Conference, European leaders literally sat down around a table to draw up the rules for dividing an entire continent. And the most crucial part? No African leaders were invited. They came up with a rule called effective occupation, which basically said, if you can control it on the ground, it's yours. And that, right there, kicked off a frantic race to grab as much land as possible. But what did all this mean for the millions of people who now found themselves living under foreign control? What was life actually like for them? Well, colonial rule created a system of profound inequality. If you lived in London or Paris, you were a citizen, and you had political rights. But if you lived in a colony, you were a subject, with few or no rights at all. You were there to be ruled, not to be represented. Now, this control looked a little different depending on where you were. Sometimes it was a colony ruled directly by a foreign governor. Other times, a protectorate, where they'd keep a local ruler as a figurehead, but the real power was held by the empire. And then you had concessions, which were all about economic control. But, at the end of the day, the result was always the same: foreign domination. Okay, so the great empires have mostly vanished from the map today. You might think that's all in the past. But their impact? Well, it's anything but history. Let's talk about the enduring legacy. The consequences were deep, and they are long-lasting. Colonial economies were totally rewired to serve Europe, which created dependencies that, you could argue, still exist today. New, rigid systems of racial segregation were put in place. And all that intense rivalry between the empires, it eventually helped light the fuse for the First World War. And that's why this period isn't just something you read about in a history book. Its effects are woven right into the fabric of our modern world. From the political borders we see on our maps to the very roots of global inequality and racism. Which brings us right back to where we started, but maybe with a bit more clarity. The empires might be gone, but many of their structures, their ideas, and their consequences are still with us. So the real question for us today is, how do you see this history shaping the world we're all living in right now?